Students, aspirants, welcome to Narayana IAS. This is Ananta Krishna, and in this special session, we will be doing an in-depth analysis of the topic chosen for today, which is the Household Consumption Expenditure Survey, which has been released recently. You will be amazed to understand that this particular topic, even though appears to be very simple, it has few dimensions, both from the preliminary and main examination, wherein this will have ramifications even over the various aspects of the macroeconomic indicators. It is this which makes this particular article or particular analysis very interesting and also intriguing simultaneously. Before dwelling into the topic, I have one request for you all. Please like, share and comment on the video. Do encourage us and don't forget to subscribe to our channel Narayana IAS, the one-stop destination for all of your UPSC Civil Service examination requirements. And also don't forget to press the bell icon below, whereby you will be receiving all those new notifications and new videos that you must follow for your UPSC exam requirements. Now we shall dwell into the article. Dear students, embark on your UPSC journey with Narayana IAS Academy. Our esteemed 5-year and 3-year integrated programs are now open for admissions in Hyderabad, Vijayawada and Nellore. Our courses include robust R&D backed initiatives such as daily news analysis, daily news review, which are comprehensive review program for a broader understanding of our day-to-day happenings, which are current affairs. Similarly, we have NCERT program, which is a foundational course that covers all the NCERT syllabi, which is crucial for UPSC preparation. We also have a mentorship program for personalized guidance, and we also have a regular test series for systematic learning and assessment of the student. So begin your journey to become a leader with Narayana IAS Academy today. Embark on this journey, make your dream come into a reality with Narayana IAS Academy. This particular survey is appearing in the newspapers day after day because of one or the other reason. This clearly tells you the importance of this particular survey. As you clearly understand and read through the title, it's all about the consumption expenditure, nothing else. It is just about this consumption expenditure. However, it has wide ramifications for even the entire macro economy. It is this we will try to know. From the UPSC syllabus point of view, yes, this is significant for your preliminary examination, wherein the questions can be on the economic social development. This particular survey also has incipiently talked about the nature and the level of poverty in India, and also this is important for including the inclusion aspect, whether it is financial inclusion or the economic inclusion. And this particular article also dwell upon the demographics. Moreover, this is significant from even the mains examination point of view, as I have already told you, where under this particular syllabus tag of planning, resource mobilization, growth, development and employment, this particular survey can be understood. Now we shall look at the previous year question, which will give you the direction in which we have to travel, and also at the same time which will also tell you why this particular survey is important for your preliminary and main examination. Look at this question asked in 2022. How is the growth of Tier 2 cities related to the rise of a new middle class with an emphasis on the culture of consumption? What you see as an important trend throughout this particular survey is that there is a changing pattern with regard to the consumption of both food and non-food items, and this change in the consumption pattern is the focus of this entire article and entire survey. Hence, this is also significant for your examination. Please keep this in mind. What is the context? As we have already discussed, this Household Consumption Expenditure Survey, HCES, is the short abbreviation that we use for this particular year of 2022-2023. in terms of a fact sheet has been released. Released by whom? Again, as a preliminary tidbit, you can know this. The National Statistical Organization, which functions under the supervision of Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. It is this particular release which has made and created this particular context to discuss this issue. What is the background? You know that since independence, the government year on year has conducted what is referred to as sample surveys. And these sample surveys generally be referred to as household surveys whenever you are collecting data for what is referred to as consumption. Remember, in any economy, for that particular matter, any economy, there are two fundamental economic activities. Remember, whenever we say economic activity and participation of a particular person in any economic activity, by which it means that he is earning some income and this income is being spent for his utilization. Meaning, earning income would be possible through the production as an activity, and spending this particular income for his requirements or utility would be possible through consumption activity, by which now it is very, very clear that there are few agents who are part of what is called as households who would be participating in what is referred to as a production activity, in what is referred to as firms, by which they earn certain income and hence this income is going back to the households. So this is what is referred to as production and this is what is referred to as consumption process. In this consumption process, whatever the income that you have earned, it will be paid back to the firms where the production is happening, and as you pay back, you will also receive the required goods and services for your satisfaction. So both production as an activity or economic activity, which in turn, remember, that is giving you some income for your utility, by which you will be buying those goods and services for what is referred to as consumption activity. So there is movement of physical goods and services and also there is movement of money in opposite direction. Both of these put together, that is economic activity of production and economic activity of consumption, are vital or backbone for any particular economy. Now in this particular survey, the focus is on consumption as an activity or economic process, by which it means that we are not focusing upon the production activity. So the household consumption expenditure survey is all about the consumption as an activity, and wherever consumption as an activity is important pillar for the macroeconomy, you will be using this particular data. This is what this particular consumption expenditure survey is trying to do. Second, these household surveys which have been conducted since independence used to be conducted for every 1 year, meaning after an elapse of 1 year, another survey would be conducted. This had been a consistent pattern. On the other hand, this had been true till the 28th such survey. However, after the 28th round, what you see is these household surveys focusing upon the consumption expenditure started to be conducted for every 5 years. Technically, the National Statistical Organization calls this quinquennial surveys, by which it means that you are conducting surveys for every 5 years. This is the brief background of these household consumption expenditure survey related information. As you clearly see here, this is the 68th round that has been conducted in 2011-2012. Since when, as I said, no other household consumption survey has been published by the government. Whatever that has been published in the form of household consumption expenditure survey 2022-2023 is the latest one post this 68th round. These are the some information that you have to know as background. Moving ahead, now we will see what this household consumption expenditure survey is. in this particular survey, basically, what the NSO would be doing is, it will be collecting information. Information related to what? Information related to consumption of goods and services by the households. Please make note of these particular three aspects. One, you are collecting information not just on goods alone, but also on services too. Second, this information is being collected to the extent of households. So this is not just limited to few regions or few districts. This is being done across India, and as we see clearly, the bottom unit, the fundamental unit of this survey is household. Second, by collecting this information, what the NSO would do is, it will draw what is referred to as weighting diagram, meaning there are few articles or commodities whose consumption expenditure is what the NSO is collecting. As per the pattern that emerges, it will try to draw which are the items which are being consumed more or preferred more for the consumption by the households in comparison with other such items. So having this weighting diagram is what the secondary requirement is. Now, what is the purpose of this having weighting diagram? By this, now NSO tries to draw what is referred to as average monthly per capita consumption expenditure. As you clearly see here, this household consumption expenditure survey is calculating the consumption expenditure per capita in the household, that too on the monthly basis, meaning monthly per capita consumption expenditure forms the backbone of entire household consumption expenditure survey. This you have to know. Moreover, as you get this particular information, what you are trying to get straight away, you are trying to get the consumption pattern, by which it means that you are also getting expenditure pattern. By on the basis of these two patterns, you will also try to know the standard of living to the extent of these households and well-being of these households. This is what we have written here. Please keep in mind, all these are significant for your preliminary examination. I remind you that this consumption of not only goods but also services is being considered. Second, you are doing this survey to the level of household as the fundamental unit. Third, on the basis of this data, you are creating a weighting diagram wherein you are attributing certain weights to whatever the classification you have over the consumption basket that you have considered for this particular survey. 3, on the basis of this, you are arriving at average monthly per capita consumption expenditure values for all those various classification of groups of people or households is possible. And fourth, this forms the backbone for knowing what is referred to as consumption and expenditure pattern, and not only this but also the standard of living and well-being of the households as you are calculating this data for the households. And in this particular survey, that is HCES 2020-2023, what they have considered is having this survey to be done for 2 consecutive years. So what you have now in the form of HCES 2020-2023 is the data from the first year. The second year survey at the field is yet to be done. This is another thing that you have to keep in mind. Moreover, this survey is also going to give you what is referred to as the characteristics of the household. What sort of characteristics that we have to attribute to the household when you are observing consumption pattern or expenditure pattern is clear from this survey. On the other hand, this also gives you the changing pattern over the demographic structure from the consumption or the consumption expenditure point of view. By observing those patterns, it is in this particular sense HCES is very, very significant. Please keep in mind that all these are important for your preliminary requirements. Moving ahead, we will also look at some of the concepts. As you clearly see that I am continuously using this expression household, household and household. What this household is as per this particular survey. Remember, household includes a group of persons and they are living together under one particular roof, wherein the central notion for this household will be on the basis of having a common kitchen, meaning the food is being shared for all the individuals who are there in that particular household, whereby they are using one kitchen, and from this one kitchen alone, the food is being distributed to all of these members in the household, by which it means that the consumption expenditure is being shared by all of these. Second aspect that we have to know is household consumption expenditure. This expression means that whatever the expenditure that is being incurred by the household for domestic consumption alone during a particular reference period, that might be a 1 week, that might be 30 days, or that might be even 365 days. So whatever the reference period that you are considering, for that reference period, whatever the expenditure has been incurred by the household for the domestic consumption requirements alone, that is referred to as household consumption expenditure. Third, when you see that there are few things which are referred to as food basket or food articles, or there are few things which are referred to as fuel and light that you would be consuming. For these particular things, including pan, tobacco and the various intoxicants such as liquor, you are measuring not just the expenditure that you incur in terms of money, how many rupees that you have spent, but also what you are doing is you are measuring the quantity of the article that is actually being used by the household during that reference period. This is very, very important, because as per the conventional definition, whenever we say consumption, it means that you are buying a particular commodity at a particular price during a particular point of time. So if I am spending 10 rupees to buy half kg of tomato, by which alone the consumption process has been completed, meaning if I spend money, that itself will be considered as the consumption process for the purpose of calculation. However, now you see that drastically this survey is focusing upon not just the spending or the expenditure aspect, particularly for these food articles and fuel and light, including pan, tobacco and intoxicants. You are also considering their actual usage within that reference period. This is something very, very drastically different from earlier surveys, by which we have to understand that they want to improve upon the quality and the measure of the expenditure or the consumption pattern that we are trying to measure. Moreover, please keep in mind that this household consumption expenditure is being calculated for a period of monthly basis, that is 30 days as one single reference period. Now this is being calculated in the form of monthly per capita expenditure. What does this monthly per capita expenditure means? In a particular household, there are certain members, as we have clearly seen in the definition, and this household monthly consumption expenditure will be considered. And if the household is having a size of, for example, 4 members, then you divide this monthly household consumption expenditure by all those members to arrive at this monthly per capita expenditure, which is an average expenditure that is being incurred by the respective household. So this particular average monthly per capita expenditure is an indicator of the level of living of that particular household. This is again another thing that you have to keep in mind. Earlier itself I told you that this survey is going to give you not just the data of consumption and expenditure pattern, but also of what is referred to as the level of living and the well-being to the extent of the foundational unit that we are considering as household. Moving ahead, we will now see what is referred to as the reference period. As you clearly see here, for all these items which are categorized as category 1, edible oil, egg, fish, meat, milk, milk products, vegetables, fruits, spices and all these, they are being considered for a reference period of 7 days. Meaning when this particular survey is held, when they go to a particular household, when they pose a particular question or give you a sheet to fill, then for all these items, they would be asking you to fill the sheet such that whatever that you have considered or consumed in the previous week or for last 7 days, that all that content in terms of quantity and also in terms of money that has been spent has to be included. So for all the food items, the last or preceding 7 days is what the reference period is. For example, all the other such requirements, other food items, or even the fuel and light or other such miscellaneous goods and services, including the medical expenses and the rents that we pay, for all these you would be considering a reference period of 30 days. So for the preceding 30 days, what had been the pattern of consumption or expenditure that a particular household has incurred. If you take into consideration clothing or bedding or footwear or education, medical such as the hospitalization, and also all those expenditure on the durable goods such as ACs and refrigerators, for all these, the preceding 365 days is the reference period. Now, what is the rationale behind these reference periods being different and distinct? Keep in mind, if I ask you how much of food that you have taken, for example, on December 21st, it is very difficult for anyone to recall, and hence for all those items where the recalling is very, very difficult, we will keep the reference period as short, number one. Number two, there is also another rationale. For all these items where the food items are being considered, the short reference period means that for last preceding 7 days, we are able to consume these food items for our requirements. This also gives you a pattern of consumption wherein you are not devoid of these food requirements that you have, and all these requirements being imminent and on regular basis, frequency being the regularity, you take the short reference period. On the other hand, for all the other such food items or miscellaneous goods and services, the reference period as 30 days, you might have understood why this has been given as 30 days. On the other hand, the expenditure over the durable goods or the education or the footwear or any other such requirements, 365 days is the reference period, because this consumption would be in terms of expenditure, spending money to buy them is going to be largely a one-time affair. Hence, you will be able to remember and easily recall when you have bought your AC in the last 1 year period, when you have bought or paid the educational fee, and hence longer duration reference period will be given to these items. Moving ahead, I hope you clearly understood what all these are. All these are important from your preliminary examination point of view. Anything can be asked in this. Moving ahead, what all those learnings and understandings that we have from the current household consumption expenditure survey, which is on the basis of whatever the data we have in terms of monthly per capita consumption expenditure. Number one, remember that this has been carried out throughout. However, few areas in Andaman and Nicobar where the access is an issue, this particular survey has not been held. Second, the sample size was to the tune of nearly 15,000 households. Third, this has been held both in urban and villages, that means the rural areas, and keep in mind that the rural households are more in number than the urban households, and these households were selected digitally in order to avoid a possible problem that whenever you are choosing households manually, there can be a bias in choosing such households. Then, as I said, there are more rural households than the urban households, and as you are carrying on or doing this consumption related, expenditure related survey, you must have the consumption basket of items. And here the consumption basket of items have been categorized into three particular categories. One is referred to as food items, and second one is referred to as consumables and services items, and the third is categorized as durable goods. It is this threefold classification that you have in the consumption basket of items. Again, another important point for your preliminary examination. And on the basis of this threefold classification, you have three separate questionnaires. Three separate questionnaires for all these three particular items respectively. And then this particular survey is being done on quarterly basis throughout the year. And keep in mind, there is a changed methodology in this survey in comparison with earlier surveys, where this sample that you are choosing, they will be asked these questions again and again periodically on quarterly basis. This is the significant change. On the other hand, all the earlier surveys were one-time affairs, meaning you are going to them, you are asking the question, asking them to recall when they did their expenditure, and if they gave some data, that is going to be final. Now, because of this changed methodology, you are getting the data from the same household, hence there is a repetition. Hence, if there is any recall error, then this recall error can also be bridged. And if there is any changed consumption pattern, as the household and the sample size is the same, you are going to also get what sort of changes in the behavior of this particular household with respect to the consumption or expenditure pattern has to be observed. All these behavioral changes can be observed. This is the significance of this particular new survey that has been conducted. On the other hand, there is one more particular questionnaire that they have, and this particular questionnaire is going to give you the household characteristics and demographic particulars also. And as I said, there are various possibilities of sequencing these questions, and they have had the 6 sequences of these 3 questionnaires that we have listed out, and this also avoids any kind of bias that is possible in terms of the questions that are being posed in a particular order. On the other hand, this is referred to as simple random sampling without replacement. All the methodology that I have discussed is referred to as simple random sampling without replacement. So you are not replacing the sample. It is the same sample which is being asked these questions again after one particular quarter over the next quarter. And all the households that you have chosen are selected into 3 groups, and these groups are chosen on the basis of criteria. There are 2 such criteria. One is land possessed in the rural areas, and the other one is possession of car in the urban areas. Again, another prelims fodder that you have to keep in mind. Moving ahead, there are certain issues in terms of comparability. This is another dimension that we have to know. One is, what are those items that have been covered in the previous survey, and what are those items that we are covering in this particular survey? Why we have to understand these issues in comparability? We have to understand this because whenever we talk about any data from this particular survey, we will say that there is some improvement over the previous survey. As you are doing this, there should not be any issues in terms of such comparison. These issues emerge because of difference in the number of items that you are covering. As you clearly see here, the number of items that you are covering in the previous survey was 347. However, in this particular survey, there are 405 items that have been covered. There is an expansion in the basket, and also whichever has been considered as obsolete for the current survey, they have been merged with some relevant item, and all this item has been considered as one single item. Second, as you clearly see, in the previous survey, there was only one single questionnaire. However, you have now 3 separate questionnaires along with this another questionnaire which is also giving you the household characteristics and demographic characteristics. Moreover, as the survey is being done repetitively over the same sample, as you clearly see that unlike earlier survey, there will be multiple times you will be visiting these households. As I said, this improves the quality of the data. Now we shall look into the core aspect of this so-called household consumption expenditure survey on the basis of these estimates related to monthly per capita expenditure. As you clearly see in this definition itself, the level of household consumption expenditure is being measured on the terms of what is referred to as monthly per capita consumption expenditure. We clearly have seen what this is by definition. Now you see this particular data. As you clearly see that the item group has been categorized into twofold classification, food and non-food. As you clearly see, for rural India, the average monthly per capita expenditure is at these levels of 1750 rupees. And if you look at the share of this monthly per capita expenditure for food for rural India in the entire or total monthly per capita expenditure, its share is below 50%, which is at 46% as per this survey. And if you see the share of non-food items, then it is at 54%. For what? For rural India. This is another data that you have to keep in mind. And remember that this is the first time that you are seeing that the household consumption expenditure on the basis of this monthly per capita expenditure has come below the 50% mark with respect to food items for rural India. This is something very radically has happened, and this has to be remembered. Second, if you look at the urban India, you see that for food items, it is at this value of 2,530 rupees as average monthly per capita expenditure. So monthly an individual is spending 2,530 rupees in order to buy his or consume his food. This is merely 39% in the entire consumption expenditure, whereas the non-food is having a higher share of 61%. As you clearly see, the food related expenditure and non-food related expenditure, with respect to both of these, urban India has lesser food related expenditure in comparison with rural India, and urban India has more non-food related expenditure automatically in comparison with rural India. This is what you have to keep in mind. Second, you have to also understand that this monthly per capita expenditure can also be calculated both at constant prices and also current prices. You know this particular difference. If you see the pattern here, with respect to the constant prices, the expenditure has increased both for rural India. The increase in the expenditure for the non-food items over this reference period of 2011-2012 to 2022-2023, what you see is this increase is higher in comparison with the urban India. This is what it is establishing. However, if you look at the same figures for the current prices, then over its previous expenditure figures, now whatever you see for urban India, its growth rate is more than the rural India. I repeat, at current prices, the growth rate of expenditure for urban India is higher in comparison with the rural India. This is another particular pattern that you have to keep in mind, by which it means that there is consistently a changing pattern in the consumption behavior. This consumption behavior is moving more and more towards non-food items than the food items. What is the implication of this? We will see this a bit later. On the other hand, if you look at the all India figures and in terms of trends in the level of consumption since 1999-2000, as you see here, clearly for rural India, the consumption has increased from 486 to 579, and from there, as you see, within 5 years, it's almost nearly doubled. From there, again, it has slowed down. However, again from 2011-2012, it has increased more than twice that you see in this particular data. For urban India also, you would see the same, and in comparison with the previous survey, that is 68th round, it has increased more than 3 times. Now, what is it being suggested? If you look at the difference as percentage of rural monthly per capita expenditure, I repeat, if you look at these differences, difference between the urban average monthly per capita expenditure with respect to all the food and non-food items in comparison with the rural monthly per capita expenditure, and take this particular difference. This difference alone is having a percentage of 75.9% with respect to the rural expenditure, meaning this difference alone is constituting such a higher proportion in the rural expenditure. This particular percentage has come down in comparison with the previous period, by which it means that there is a changing pattern also within the rural India in comparison with the urban India, and this changing pattern is showing a higher level of growth in comparison with the previous years wherein such survey has been conducted. This is another aspect that you have to keep in mind for prelims. On the other hand, this data also divides the entire households into what is referred to as factile groups, and these factile groups have been identified as 0 to 5%, 5 to 10%, like this. And if you look at these factile groups and when you make a comparison, as this particular figure shows, clearly the spending of urban top 5% is 10 times more than that of bottom 5%. So within these factile groups, I repeat, the spending of the urban top 5% is more than 10 times that of bottom factile group of 0 to 5%. As you see this drastic difference, what you are observing is over time period, the inequality has been getting widened and widened. And this is also true even for the rural India. The bottom 5% is having a mere consumption expenditure of 1373 rupees in comparison with the rural top 5% expenditure of 10,501 rupees. Again showing the same kind of the widening inequality within the regions of rural and urban households. Second, as you clearly see that for urban households, the non-food items had been at 57.4%. Now it has come to nearly 61%, wherein the food expenditure has come down to 39%. Whereas this decline is much more rapid for rural India, wherein this non-food expenditure has increased from 47% to 53%, whereas the food expenditure has declined from 53% to 46.4%. Another prelims related important pattern that you see in this household expenditure survey. I repeat, the decline in terms of food article consumption is at a rapid rate in rural areas in comparison with the urban areas or urban households. Moreover, if you move ahead, this particular monthly per capita expenditure, which is symbolic of household consumption expenditure pattern, is highest for Sikkim for both rural and urban households. So for rural it is at 7,700 and for urban it is at 12,105, higher than the Indian average. Moreover, it is lowest in Chhattisgarh both for urban and rural. On the other hand, if you consider the union territories, then monthly per capita expenditure is highest in Chandigarh if you consider the rural area, and highest for even the urban area. If you consider all the union territories and the states, then with respect to rural households, it is the Chandigarh which is topping. It is the Chandigarh which is topping. Whereas, if you consider both states and union territories, then with respect to rural households, it is Sikkim which is at the highest level of consumption expenditure. Whereas, with respect to urban households, it is Chandigarh which is at the highest level of consumption expenditure. Within the union territories, the lowest consumption expenditure is recorded for Ladakh for rural households and for Lakshadweep for urban households. All these are significant for your preliminary point. The other such trends that you see is with regard to this consumption of cereals and food items. This has an important consequence given the fact that the farmers are agitating for legalizing the minimum support price. As you clearly see, since 1999-2000, the percentage share of cereals in average monthly per capita expenditure has been gradually declining, where it was at this level of 22.23% in 1999-2000. Now you see that it has come down to this mere levels of nearly 4.91% or merely approximately 5%. This drastic decline in this consumption of cereals has been covered by the percentage share of food in terms of milk, milk products, eggs, even the fruits, vegetables, and all these have shown a significant increase. As you clearly see that the percentage share of these foods have clearly maintained a particular level. However, in totality, the percentage share is at these levels of 46%. On the other hand, for urban areas again, the decline is again seen with respect to cereals in terms of this monthly per capita expenditure, whereas as you also know that this decline is also seen for the entire food articles too. But as you observe here, in comparison with urban India, it is the rural households which has seen a rapid decline in the demand for cereals in the entire average monthly per capita expenditure. Moving ahead, if you look at these fractals, then there is one aspect that I wanted to showcase here, because of which I have added this table, which is showcasing the figures for all India households that have been considered as a sample. As you see that, as you are moving from 90 to 95% to 95 to 100%, the increase in the expenditure is drastically increasing. Similarly, even for the urban areas, by which it means that as you are earning more, you are able to also spend more, and as you are able to spend more, you are getting more and more income in order to spend even more and more, which is not the case for the lowest strata that you are considering. So moving from one particular fractal group to another particular fractal group is going to be difficult at the lower levels, and as we see here, it is also difficult at the highest levels, as this expenditure pattern is showcasing. This aspect is what I wanted you to focus upon. Moving ahead, as you clearly see in this particular data, again my focus had been on few particular items which you have to look into. For example, with respect to education, as you see, for urban areas, this particular expenditure is showing a decline since 2009-2010. So the highest expenditure has been marked in 2009-2010, since when it is showing a declining trend. On the other hand, if you look at the rural areas, as you clearly see, this highest levels have been marked again in 2009-2010, since when you are also seeing a decline, marginal decline in the consumption expenditure of the households with respect to education. Moreover, as you clearly see in this, the aspect of conveyance is taking more and more expenditure for urban areas. Similarly, it is also taking more expenditure for rural areas. This is another prelims aspect that you have to keep in mind. Logistics, transport, meaning conveyance, is taking more expenditure. It is putting more pressure on your pocket than even the food articles and education. You have to clearly keep this in mind. On the other hand, with respect to fuel and light, earlier in 2004-2005, it has marked highest, and even for the rural areas, it has been marked highest. From there, it is showing a declining trend for both rural and urban areas. And more fascinating aspect here, as you clearly see, that the cereals and pulses consumption is being declining for urban areas, and here too you see that it is being on the decline. On the other hand, what you see is the milk and milk products, as you clearly see, is hovering at those levels of 7%, wherein for rural areas also it is hovering at these levels of 8%. This increasing consumption of milk and milk products, increasing consumption of vegetables, and increasing consumption of fruits, egg, fish, and meat. All these are compensating what is referred to as your consumption of cereals. Now, why are we referring to this particular data? If consumption expenditure over cereals is declining and consumption expenditure over all these other products is increasing, by which it translates into one particular fact. Cereals, that is particularly rice and wheat, have been subjected to lot of administrative mechanism, administrative control, either in the form of MSP or in the form of what is referred to as procurement. On the other hand, all the other products are subjected to market mechanism. As and when something is subjected to market mechanism, its consumption pattern is showing a healthy trend, by which it means that there is a requirement for the entire agriculture and allied sector. The focus has to become more and more market oriented, number one, and number two, the focus also must shift to the allied sectors such as dairy sector, such as fisheries, such that there is additional income that is being generated for the farm households. This aspect we have to focus upon. On the other hand, if you look at these durable goods, the durable goods expenditure has been increasing again for both rural areas and urban areas. And the highest expenditure is seen in the urban areas, and rural areas, as I said, is also seeing an increasing trend, which is also showcasing a change in the consumption pattern with respect to not only the food items and non-food items, but keeping into consideration all the items. When you make a comparison, the durable goods consumption pattern is clearly telling you that over time, the consumption pattern both in rural and urban areas is going to see some radical and very substantial changes. So, rather than the legalization of MSP as a demand, the focus has to be on far-reaching agricultural reforms. There is another thing that we have to see. As you clearly see here, the average monthly per capita expenditure for these particular groups have been given. One such group is self-employed in agriculture. Now, what is self-employed? Suppose a particular individual is working in his own farm or has his own enterprise. Then whatever the profit or income that he is generating out of this enterprise or farm is referred to as self-employed. So, economic activity is there. It is giving him some income. However, it is from his own economic activity. Ownership is his. For all those self-employed in rural areas or rural India, the household is having lowest monthly per capita expenditure. This is something fascinating, which again translates into some outcome if you look at the farmers' protest. As you see here, the farmers are protesting for some reason. They don't know what is that particular reason. However, there is some distress. One such distress is clearly visible here. That is the lowest monthly per capita expenditure for all those self-employed in their own farms and non-farms, by which it means that as you clearly see that the farmland is getting divided into smaller pieces, there is increase in the marginal and small farmers, and because of this declining land holding size, we know that the productivity level is also getting either declined or stagnated, and hence we also have seen earlier that this is translating into more and more number of casual labor within these farms, and all these point to this particular fact as you see this particular figure. Similarly, for those who are self-employed in non-agriculture, wherein it is non-farm enterprise, then he is getting an income, or they have a monthly per capita expenditure of 4,074, which is higher than the monthly per capita expenditure of self-employed in agriculture. But once you come to those regular wage salaried earning in agriculture, they are getting much lesser income than those who are self-employed, because they are just the ones who are working as a regular wage employee. Clearly, you have to keep in mind that this regular wage or salaried earning is distinct from casual labor. In casual labor, what you will have is either you are getting this income on daily basis or during a certain period, but on the basis of what is referred to as work contract. So it is this work contract which is defining you as casual labor, and you are working on your non-owned either farmland or a non-farm enterprise. For all those casual labor, the monthly per capita expenditure is much lower than the monthly per capita expenditure for all the other groups. Secondly, the casual labor in non-agriculture too is not earning much higher than the casual labor in agriculture. So this consumption pattern that you are seeing with respect to casual labor is clearly showing you the rural distress that you see, and because of which the farmers are protesting. This hint is clearly visible in this survey. But if you come to the urban India, as you see here, the self-employed is the one who are earning this to this level of 6,067. But if you look at the casual labor, they are the ones who are earning the least. But the others are earning to the extent of 8,600. So if you are a salaried one, then your income is going to be to the extent of 7,000. As you clearly see here, either the rural India or in the urban India, it is the casual labor which is getting the least. And this consumption pattern which you are seeing here is going to tell you what sort of distress that the both rural and urban areas with respect to these casual labors are undergoing. If you look at the social groups, then the scheduled tribes are spending lesser than the scheduled castes in the rural areas. But if you go to the urban areas, the trend is getting reversed. It is the scheduled castes which are spending lesser than the scheduled tribes, and then they are spending lesser than even the other backward castes. The others are spending the highest. As this data is clearly showing you, the structural factors are also still remaining within the society. What are those implications that we want to learn from this particular survey? As we have already discussed, the first such implication is with regard to these farmers' protest and the demand for legalizing MSP. We clearly know what is the requirement. The requirement is with respect to more far-reaching structural reforms within agriculture, whereby you are moving towards more and more market-oriented structure within agriculture rather than the current structure which is purely oriented towards cereals. Second aspect is, as you clearly see that this monthly per capita consumption expenditure is the basis for considering what sort of consumption pattern is occurring. We know this now. We have learned this. Now, there is some applicability of this particular fact. What is that applicability? Keep in mind, as we have already discussed, this monthly per capita expenditure, which is the basis for this household consumption expenditure survey, is the basis to consider your consumer price index. How? Whatever the basket of goods and services that we are considering, all these basket of goods and services have certain weightage. Now recall what you have learnt in the first slide itself. You are trying to give certain weightage related information with respect to those goods and services we will consume. Meaning all this is to make sure that you are constructing a consumer price index which is in tune with the observed consumption pattern within Indian economy. Hence, this monthly per capita consumption expenditure data, whatever we have, whatever the consumption pattern that we are observing, is going to define the consumer price index in future. And clearly we know that for rural India and for urban India, the food related consumption is on the decline, number one, and number two, within this, the consumption of cereals is radically declining, and accordingly there has to be some change in the consumer price index food related basket. Take into consideration the current scenario. We know that it is because of food price inflation as we are expecting, and as this particular food price inflation has certain weightage within consumer price index, which is to the tune of nearly 46% if I include even the beverages too. then this should be rationalized in such a way that which is matching with the consumption pattern which has been observed through this household consumption expenditure survey. This is the second requirement that we have. There is a third consequential requirement because of this, or consequential thing that emerges, macroeconomic requirement that emerges because of this observation. That is, as you change the consumer price index basket, as you are working towards the inflation targeting, now the weight of the food basket is going to be declined. Accordingly, other food items or other such articles which are being consumed more and more, for example, the durable goods or conveyance, they get more weightage, and as they get more weightage, you would see that the retail inflation is going to show a different kind of pattern in terms of its volatility. This is going to have some impact over how monetary policy is being decided. Now, as you clearly know that it is the possible spike in food price inflation is deciding the repo rate, the anchor of the monetary policy. Now, it is going to be some other basket which would be deciding, wherein the weightage of food articles would be declining, and hence retail inflation is going to show more stability. Just recall core inflation. The core inflation, which is at 3.7%, was so stable for last 18 months, given the fact that there is spike in the food price inflation and possible observation of such food price inflation, which has raised the headline inflation to this level of 5.1%. It is this aspect that we have to keep in mind. Fourth, as this changes, there is another implication that we might observe. We know that the calculation of GDP is done both in terms of nominal GDP and real GDP. And we know that both of them are related by GDP deflator. And in India, GDP deflator is an average of both wholesale price index and consumer price index. If there is change in the consumer price index and then there is change in the GDP deflator also, as there is change in the GDP deflator, then the figures that you are arriving at with respect to GDP, that is real and nominal, is also going to be different. It will have an impact on these figures too, meaning whatever the final output that you are producing within the economy, it is also going to be determined by this consumption or expenditure pattern or behavior that you are observing. This is another aspect that you have to keep in mind. Fifth, as you are observing that this particular survey is being compared with the previous surveys, keep in mind one particular fact. The previous surveys, whatever the data they have on the basis of a reference period of 365 days, meaning they were asking the sample or the households to get or recall the consumption that they have done with respect to these durable goods, because it was easy for them to recall the expenditure over these durable goods than having such longer reference period and asking them to recall their expenditure pattern with respect to, for example, food items. It is not possible. However, we have reduced this reference period with respect to the latest data to the level of 7% for 7 days for all the comparative purposes, wherein you are asking them to recall how much of food or food articles have been consumed, not only in terms of money that you have spent to purchase them, but also in terms of how much of it actually has been consumed in a quantitative way. This is going to give you more fluid and dynamic data in comparison with the previous data, and hence this is more reliable. There is another aspect that you have to keep in mind. We have recently measured what is referred to as multidimensional poverty index, which has clearly and categorically mentioned that the poverty has declined in India. If you take into consideration this survey too, this also gives you, on the basis of whatever the consumption pattern that we are observing, some incipient understanding and direction related to the decline or the increase in the poverty. For example, World Bank definition, if you consider, of acute or extreme levels of poverty, we know that if you are getting or spending this $1.9 per day, in order to get whatever the basket of goods and services that you have to get as per this definition specific to a particular economy, then you are out of this acute poverty. If I observe and apply this particular figure, then you will observe that this translates into somewhere around 750 and 900 for both rural and urban India. And if you look at the consumption pattern, it appears that if you take into consideration just this 0 to 5 factile group, except some percentage of households in this particular group, most of the households have been brought out of this acute poverty levels. This is what Niti Aayog CEO was referring to when he was referring to this survey, saying that the poverty levels have drastically come down even below 5%. Keep in mind, he is referring to this acute poverty as a benchmark. Poverty, whenever you are measuring, you will be measuring it with respect to a poverty line. $1.9 is the poverty line for acute poverty. Moreover, if you take into consideration this figure of $3.2 per day, which is the poverty line, that we have defined on the basis of 5 least income countries as per the definition of World Bank. If I apply this, then in 2011-2012, as you see, given the consumption pattern that we have, more than 50% of the population used to be considered as below poverty line. Now, this figure for the current year of 2022-2023, keeping in mind the fact that inflation levels were 5.6% then, now 5.7%, this has come down to a mere levels of 21%. So, this decline has happened even with respect to this $3.2 figure. However, this decline is not as rapid as you observe for the acute poverty levels. All these are certain implications out of this consumption expenditure survey. Having completed the discussion, having understood this household consumption expenditure survey length and breadth, we will try to solve few questions. Take this first question. Consider the following statements. The household consumption expenditure survey released recently is based on both the monthly per capita consumption expenditure and average annual per capita consumption expenditure. Clearly, we know that this is a false statement. The nodal agency to conduct and release the survey is National Statistical Organization under Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. We know that this is the right statement and hence answer has to be 2 only. Moving to second question, consider the following statements. Until 28th round of National Sample Survey, the Consumer Expenditure Survey used to be an yearly exercise, which is a correct statement. At present, the HCS is a quinquennial survey, which is also a correct statement. The Household Consumption Expenditure Survey collects information on consumption of goods alone, which is a false statement. How many of them are incorrect? Only one is incorrect, hence answer has to be A. Moving to the third question, consider the following statements. The Household Consumption Expenditure Survey measures the standard of living and well-being to the level of households as a unit, which is the correct statement. The Household Consumption Expenditure Survey forms the basis for formulating the weights in both Wholesale Price Index and Consumer Price Index, and we know that it formulates only the Consumer Price Index and there it becomes the basis. On the other hand, the third statement says, for the purposes of calculating the monthly per capita expenditure, the Household Consumption Expenditure Survey considers the average size of the household to be 4, which is again a incorrect statement. It can be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 as per the observation. So, how many of the above statements are incorrect? As you clearly see, there are 2 such statements which are incorrect and hence answer has to be B. Move to the fourth question. For articles of food, the Household Consumption Expenditure Survey measured the quantity of articles actually consumed, whereas for other non-food articles, it considers the expenditure incurred in terms of money alone, which is the correct statement. The consumption basket included food items and durable goods only, which is a false statement because there are many other consumables it had and the services also it had. Third, for the first time, the Household Consumption Expenditure Survey 2022-2023 has selected the households for the sample survey digitally, which is the correct statement. How many of the above statements are incorrect? Answer has to be one only, hence answer has to be A. Moving to the fifth and final question. In the context of Household Consumption Expenditure Survey 2022-2023, consider the following statements. At constant prices, the monthly per capita consumption expenditure of rural households is higher than the monthly per capita expenditure of urban households, whereas at current prices, the monthly per capita expenditure of urban households is higher than the rural households, which is a correct statement as we have learnt. Second statement, for the first time, the consumption of food articles for both rural and urban households has declined below 50% in the consumption basket under consideration, which is a false statement because for urban households, this decline has already been seen for last few surveys. However, for rural alone, this has come down below 50%. So, it is a false statement. For both states and union territories, Sikkim recorded the highest monthly per capita expenditure. As we clearly know that this is also a false statement. So, how many of the above statements are incorrect? There are two such statements, hence answer has to be 2. I hope this video has served your purpose. It has given you in and out understanding related to this consumption, expenditure and their patterns through this particular survey, and I hope that you have understood this very clearly. And as I said, this would serve your purpose both for preliminary and main examination, including whenever you attend this personality test. Even those requirements are also fulfilled through this particular discussion. Thank you one and all for watching this, and please, as I said in the beginning itself, do like, share and comment on the video, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel Narayana IAS. Thank you one and all.